as the participants in this meeting, as the number grows, we'll wait for a few more people to show up, but welcome to the Starting a Firewood Bank webinar. We have some great folks who are going to share about their knowledge, a little bit of their knowledge about starting a wood bank, what forms it can take, and how it can be funded. So we'll wait a few more minutes and we'll get started here. In the meantime, as you're entering, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm going to be sure to make sure that everyone can enter their name and where they're coming from, just so that we know. I think there are going to be a lot of us here, but hopefully we can get a chance to see where everyone's coming from today, since we're on this wonderful Zoom platform that allows us to join from all over the world, potentially. Wonderful, thanks. All right, why don't we get started? Welcome, everybody. This is the Starting a Firewood Bank webinar. And we're so happy to have you all here today. And we're here with Dr. Jessica Leahy and John Ackerly and Darian Dyer. Jessica is coming from the University of Maine, as am I. My name is Elisa Shine. You've been getting emails from me. But now you know my face as well. And we'll hear from Jessica a little bit about the community guide that she was co-author of in 2015. The community guide to starting and running a wood bank, in addition to other experiences that she's had with wood banks. And from John and Darian about the Alliance for Green Heat and its management of the federal grant program for firewood banks. Wow, this is wonderful. What a great group we have from all over. So I'm going to, as you introduce yourselves, which is we're all going to want to pay attention to, but we're going to pass the baton over to Jessica, who is going to start us off here.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's great to see those chats coming in. I am Jessica Leahy. I'm at the University of Maine, and our National Wood Bank project is joint between our School of Forest Resources and the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I'm a professor here at the University of Maine. So excited to see the chat though, because I grew up in Alaska. I went to school in Oregon and Minnesota, and now I'm in New England, and I see many states that I have connections to flying by. So today I will be sharing, I assumed that the people who signed up for this workshop are starting a wood bank, interested in getting it going, and I wanted to talk about the guide that we have. And before we do that, we'd like to start with some acknowledgements. And in particular, first we start with a land acknowledgement that we've owe to a group of researchers involved in our team who have written it in a way that works for these wood bank presentations around the country. So we recognize and honor the Indigenous peoples whose homelands, often unceded, are the life source for the natural resources and communities discussed in this presentation. We honor the millennia of Indigenous stewardship that shaped the lands and the resources surrounding us today, and are actively working in community with Indigenous nations to ensure that these lands and resources are accessible, affirming, and sustaining for the people of those lands. And we have some other thank yous to share. Elisa has done a lot to pull this webinar series together, and we'll have monthly webinars going forward. So stay connected with us for that. Our funding comes from the USDA Forest Service, and Brian Brashaw is our contact there. We're very thankful for the resources that he provides. We work very closely with the Alliance for Green Heat and John and Darian and their coworkers, and the photos, many of the photos today that you'll see in these slides come from the Alliance for Green Heat and the wood banks that are participating in the grant program. We have a group that meets monthly, the National Firewood Bank team, and that's very influential and helps us do the work that we do. In particular, I've worked the longest with Rick Harper from UMass Amherst, Clarice Hart at Harvard Forest, and Sean Mahoney at Massachusetts Department of Conservation Resources, DCR. So I'm thankful for them and the work that we've done on wood banks. And then I'm also thankful for all the people who are running or even contemplating running a wood bank. All right, so I'm going to talk today about what is in and advice that comes from our community guide to starting and running a wood bank. If you'd like to download this, we have this easy link, and I have this slide repeated 3 different times. So if you don't get the easy link copied down, you'll see it again, tinyurl.com/firewoodbankguide. As well, there's a permanent link listed. It's a little bit longer. It's where that tiny URL takes you. Many times you're able to, if you Google Digital Commons, University of Maine, Wood Bank, you can go there as well. Okay, so first, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with defining what a wood bank is. It's very much like a food bank or a food pantry, where people who are facing heating insecurity can go for little or no cost to access firewood. Currently, there are a growing number of wood banks throughout the country. Where I am here in New England, about 10 years ago, we were able to identify 10 to 12 wood banks in various stages of formality. And now in this very same region where we had 10 years ago, we know of 30. So 3 times as many in just a decade. They've been around a long time, though. So when I started working in this, in that same time frame, about a decade ago, I thought I had discovered something new. I knew I didn't invent it because the Cumberland Wood Bank had been in existence and using that term wood bank. But I shared it with my mentor, the late Dr. Dave Kittredge from UMass Amherst. And he said, "Oh, no, that's been around for a very long time." And when he graduated from forestry school way back when, in the 70s, he worked for the state of Vermont. And one of his first tasks was to go split wood for one of the local churches because they had a wood bank off to the side. And there's a long tradition of neighbors helping neighbors everywhere. And it's as a term, the wood bank a firewood bank is starting to become more and more common. Wood banks are becoming more and more organized. And some of that is because of the current funding that's available for wood banks that the Alliance for Green Heat is managing in partnership with the USDA Forest Service. And you'll learn about that as we continue the presentation today. Beyond that, it's really hard to describe wood banks because they are diverse. They are all tailored to whatever community it is that you might be running your wood bank in. They are all run differently. Some focus on emergency supplies, where it's just an armload of wood to get you through the night so your pipes don't freeze, to others where there's a 1 or 2 cord delivery at the beginning of the year. Some are using street trees and accepting donations from arborists who drop off trees. Some have the state supplying them with truckloads of wood. Others are purchasing wood. About half of the wood banks are affiliated with religious organizations, while an equal number are not religiously affiliated. All of them, though, do involve volunteers. And you see here in the bottom right is a photo of the Cumberland Wood Bank. They do an annual potluck dinner called the Banquet, and it's spelled BANK like their wood bank. Almost all wood banks rely on volunteers to some extent. A small number, do have paid staff somehow involved. The guide is based on work that Sabrina Vivian, a University of Maine now alum, did as her senior capstone project over a 2-year period. She interviewed all of the wood banks that we could find. She brought them together, and in doing that, she was able to learn about how they're organized, how they formed, the challenges that they had encountered, and then she wrote the guide in order to help future wood banks think through those decisions that you would need to get started. So I want to take an aside because part of what she did was map out those 10 wood banks that we could identify back in 2014. That's what the guide is based on. However, there's been this growth in wood banks, and there's continued need for wood banks. I'll show some maps focused on New England. We hope to do this for other regions in the United States. Where are wood banks needed? We can try to estimate demand for that by looking for the intersection of two things. Areas where there's fuel poverty, energy poverty households. Often there's people with emergency costs that are interfering with their heating security. So medical issues, unexpected unemployment, cold snaps. And then there's also chronic poverty in some communities. You also want to target to start wood banks where people are heating with wood, and that's challenging. We use the American Community Survey to find, which asks Americans about what's their primary source of heat. That underestimates where people have it as a secondary source or an emergency source. When we bring this all together for New England, and I apologize for not having this yet done for the entire United States, we use the census data that talks about housing cost, and we look at people that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs, rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, taxes, all those things that are tied to maintaining your home, which would include heat. Any community in which 1 out of 5 families or houses are spending over that threshold for their housing costs, we flag as having a high cost burden. Then we also look at the census results for the percentage of people heating with wood. And there we see we use a 4% over the regional average, and that gets flagged. But you can see there's a lot of need throughout New England, and I think if we did this for the whole United States, we'd see in northern, in colder climates that is shows up to be true. Here's where the 30 wood banks are in New England currently. There are places where it matches up wonderfully, where there are high households that are experiencing really high housing cost burden, and that it's in communities in which wood heat is very common. However, if you look at this map, you can see that there are some bright red communities in which there are not yet wood banks. We hope to see that there, and we'd like to see that as this mapping technique gets expanded. I think we'll be able to identify other areas where wood banks are, where there's indications that it would be a great relief to the people that live there. Sabrina, after doing all these interviews, she brought everybody in person together to network and to share stories. And from all of that information that she gathered is how this guide came about. The guide's been downloaded over 1,700 times, and from around the world, but mostly here in the United States. And we've had really positive feedback. So I'd encourage all of you that are starting a wood bank to at least check it out. There's wood bank profiles in there. It might be very helpful to you. Let's start to dive in, as I don't want to take too much time from John and Darian, but I want to talk about some of the key considerations as you're getting started on your wood bank. Absolutely should be tailored to your community and what's going to work with your situation. There are some things to think about. Number one that we hear from wood banks is finding a site, a suitable site that's flat, that has the space to work up wood, where the neighbors won't be bothered by some of the noises of chainsaws or splitters. that depending on your distribution method, recipients will be able to get in and out easily. So location, finding that spot sometimes is challenging. You explore different things with a municipality or with a nonprofit, find out if they're comfortable with this as you explore it. So one of the first things to get started with. Next up is to think about where your volunteers are going to come from and if they're able to come on a year-round basis, on a regular. Many wood banks get together every Saturday or seasonally every Saturday, but there are also wood banks that rely on corporate volunteers or church groups who come for a short period of time to do sort of ministry work. And some use youth, different scouting groups or high schoolers that need service requirements. Really depends on where you are and what your volunteer base looks like. Many volunteers are retired people who really enjoy splitting wood, maybe don't burn as much wood as their splitting needs are. And the volunteers almost always report a really rewarding experience working at the wood bank and interacting with others who enjoy helping their neighbors and splitting firewood. Next up, you're going to want to think about your firewood sources. And again, this comes from all over. Some places buy wood, some places get wood donated. Some people have an arrangement with arborists, towns dropping off wood. Really depends, but you're going to want to think the size of your wood bank will depend on your ability to procure firewood. And we're going to have a later webinar that really focuses on sourcing because there are a lot of different arrangements, but making sure you're able to get firewood from a local area for forest health concerns will be a key thing to factor into your startup. Next up is how you're going to process the wood. And so this ranges, there are some wood banks that have split wood delivered to them and they're focused on stacking and bundling. There are some that get tree length wood and they do their own bucking and splitting. Some start by hand splitting, many transition into using a splitter, yet others have processors and more advanced equipment. So thinking through what your workflow will be and what you have available now, what you might be able to increase capacity with through the grant funding will be something for you to talk about. Same with equipment. I kind of jumped over, or that sort of combines with what I said, but there's a lot of equipment choices and options, and you want to think about what's going to work with your volunteer base and what they'll be able to do safely. And speaking of that, legalities and liabilities. So many wood banks, when we talk with them, they're very interested in this question of liability. That's again another webinar we hope to focus a whole hour on. What I can say is that some wood banks have identified insurance agents willing to provide them with liability insurance. Others that are affiliated with churches or nonprofits have already, the larger parent organization has liability, and they're able to call and extend that liability protection to the wood bank. The sites where we hear the most concerns about liability are municipalities, towns, or county governments. Some of those municipalities are able to overcome their liability concerns by having waivers and things like that, but others are not able to feel comfortable with that risk, and the wood bank tries to find a site in which that's okay. Waivers are common, and then considerations about the recipients. So they're encouraging them to have safe burning practices, providing smoke detectors and batteries, liability waivers for them, all ways of addressing some of the legalities and liabilities. Related to legalities, some wood banks are their own organization, others affiliate with an existing nonprofit. Okay, next you're going to want to talk about recipient qualification. Some wood banks decide not to vet their recipients at all. They have a open access and an open call, and they have decided that they believe people won't take advantage of the free firewood, or if they do, those people will be in the minority. Others have quite extensive vetting processes and often will use another social service agency to evaluate the recipients and to provide them with a voucher, so that the wood bank organization doesn't have to be involved in learning too much about the personal circumstances of the recipients. They allow the United Way or whatever the community health organization is. You're going to want to think about timing. And so we see all sorts of wood banks organizing in different ways, from blitzes and then distributing all the wood on a common day in the fall. Others have this throughout the year. Probably the number one thing about timing is distributing dry wood, allowing enough time for the moisture content of the wood to be safely distributed to people. So many wood banks are working very hard to get a year ahead of demand so that wood can be seasoned. Next up is distribution. Sometimes wood banks require recipients to come to the place, to the wood bank, to pick up the wood. Others rely on volunteer vehicles, a little wear and tear as part of what's being donated. Other wood banks have the resources to be able to buy dump trucks and things like that, or have donations made to them. But you will want to think about distribution, whether you're going to stack at the recipient's house or not, things like that. Next up, you want to think about the size of the wood bank. How much wood, how many cords of wood can you process, and how much do you want to give out? This ranges from armloads to 1 to 2 cords we've heard about, and really depends on what's sustainable for your group. Security is a concern, and so periodically we hear, at least from the wood banks in Maine, that sometimes there are firewood thefts. So you'll want to think about security. Will you lock up the wood? Will you use game cams? We can't all have volunteers stationed guarding the wood like this photo has. That would be nice, but you'll want to think a little bit about security. It's not super common, but it does happen, and the group will want to be prepared for that. And then partnerships. Every wood bank is going to find in your local area wonderful partnerships. So it might be with some of the arborists in your community. It might be with some of the woodland owners or land trusts. It might be with some of the community social service agencies to help connect you to people who need firewood. And then another thing that we run into is wood banks are often started by a catalyst, a champion, probably many of you who joined the webinar today, and thinking about what happens as you want to move on to a new project, or you want to share some of the leadership opportunities. We encourage wood banks to think about their structure in a way that it's not fully dependent on just one coordinator, that it's able to sustain itself going forward. Okay, hold on here. There, whoops. I have one more slide. Great, okay. So in the back of the guide is this appendix called a wood bank checklist, and it's intended to be used at a community meeting or an organizing session and guide you through some of these questions so that you can talk with the folks that you're going to run the wood bank with and come to some decisions about those key decision points. And I believe that's my last slide, so I'm going to hand it over to John and Darian now.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty, John, you can take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm John Ackerly. I'm president of the Alliance for Green Heat. And we were thrilled to be part of this movement. to support and build more wood banks. So just a teeny bit about our organization. We're a very small nonprofit based in Maryland. We usually have 3 or 4 or 2 staff at a time. The picture here is of lots of former staff and fellows, volunteers, interns. And we were set up 14 years ago to promote cleaner and more efficient wood heating. You know, there's huge movement in this country for solar and wind and lots of other renewables. And we think that this renewable is really important. It has a lot of potential and it should be recognized as such. It's also very problematic. You know, it's not a simple one, but you know, no energy is. So anyway, most of our funding comes from USDA Forest Service now for this program. We also get money from DOE, and we've worked with the DOE to try to improve the technology to make a better wood stove, to automate the wood stove, and that's a work in progress. And we have a great newsletter. I hope you can all join. Next. So yeah, this is Jessica kind of already went over this, but you know, firewood. Well, there's nothing more American than firewood. This country was really built on wood, and I suspect firewood banks date back pretty much even before Europeans came to America, probably. I mean, wood is, since it's something that grows all around us, it's a natural thing, just like food, to share, especially if there's someone in your community that is ill or old. You know, I think we've been sharing firewood forever. And, you know, nationally, we know about maybe 100, but I think there could be 300 or 400 or 500. No one knows how many people are engaged in this. Whether you call yourself a bank or not is totally unimportant. I love the term firewood ministry, which, you know, we use interchangeably. But whatever you call yourself, we love the idea of helping other people in need in your community, and not just with firewood, with other things too. And we are a country that, you know, we have tons of wood in this country. It's amazing how much wood goes to the landfill or just left. And I love the idea that we use wood that's already down or fallen instead of throwing it away. And I think that's what a lot of this community is all about. Next slide. Okay, so this program came into being a few years ago when a very generous staffer on the Hill, you know, a lot of our government is run by these young people who have good ideas. And so he put a line in the Farm Bill saying that $8 million should go to firewood banks over a period of 5 years. So most of that money is now coming through our organization to give away in small grants, and some of it's also going to University of Maine, University of Massachusetts to do other work around wood banks. So the first year, last year, we only gave grants to existing wood banks. This year, the Forest Service, and we wanted to extend it to brand new banks, banks that don't have a track record. And we have almost 700,000 to give. Next slide. And you know, the challenges of giving money to a new bank are a little different because there's no track record. We don't quite know capabilities, organizational level of different initiatives. But in general, you know, our goal isn't we want to support whatever organization you may have. And there's, as Jessica mentioned, there's dozens of different models for giving away wood. And we want to, so we don't want to force groups to be in any sort of shape or size or color, but we do have some goals and some restrictions. So what we try to do, or what we like to think we do, is help banks be safer. So we require banks to have or buy safety equipment and first aid supplies. So that's pretty much every grant we give, people will put $200, $300, up to $1,000 sometimes for safety equipment, depending on how many volunteers they have and how much they have. So that's chaps and gloves and ear protection, eye protection. The other thing we require is that banks use liability waivers. And this is both for you and for us. We want the liability waiver to name us because, this is a dangerous activity. We have people using chainsaws and splitters. A lot of banks, may use teenagers or older people that may or may not have a lot of experience. So it's really important to provide some protection for yourself and for everyone involved by having a liability waiver. It doesn't, they're not foolproof in any way, but they help and they educate people that they're getting involved in dangerous work. The next thing is that we really work with banks. We want to try to urge them to deliver seasoned wood because you probably all know that wet wood creates a lot of smoke, which is a public health issue a lot. It also puts creosote in the chimney, which is a major cause of chimney fires. So it's really important. And we know it's really hard to always deliver seasoned wood because often you get it and you need to get it out to people that need it. But, we really don't want banks to make burning wood in your living room any more dangerous than it already is. So this is an ongoing process of just trying to figure out how you can get your wood split and seasoned before you give it out, especially if you're giving it out in the burning season. And we also love the idea of that our funding can help groups grow and serve more households. And lastly, and this is, Jessica and Lisa are really involved in this, is helping banks like webinars like this to learn from each other how to be more efficient and resourceful. Next. Okay, so, and again, so wood banks, the pitfalls of wood banks are also opportunities. So as I mentioned, what we're also trying to do is encourage banks to engage with the people you give wood to and ask them if they have, a smoke detector, when their chimney was cleaned last. And in general, the funding that we provide is supposed to go to the bank, not to the homes, but there are some small things. So like a smoke detector, you can put that in your budget. You could buy 50 smoke detectors and give one out to everyone who needs one, depending on how many people you serve. The other thing is just ask people, if they're, we assume most banks, you don't want to go into people's houses necessarily, but is this picture from the lower left, a lot of people have stoves where there's combustible materials too close to the stove. And it's just a really good reminder, just to remind people, ask them if they do have a relative or friend or someone who can, work with that person to make sure that their stove is safe. That can go a long way. And one thing you can do, if you're delivering wood, you can just look up at the top of the smokestack of the chimney and see whether that chimney is covered with creosote. You can see here, it's plainly visible. That is, a chimney that could catch on fire any moment, really. And you don't want to be the last one to deliver wood if a house were to catch fire. So, this is while you're doing wonderful work in helping people, we do have to be mindful of the some of the serious consequences of doing what a lot of us really love to do, is heat with wood. Next. Okay, so that's all I have. I just want to thank everyone and turn it over to my colleague Darian, who's going to go through some of the logistics of applying for a grant.
Yeah, so I'm gonna really kind of walk y'all completely through the application really quickly. That's a long URL. I'll just put it in the chat, so don't even pay attention to that. So when you first open up the form, this is exactly what you're going to be met with at the top. Something to note, if you don't receive a success message when you push submit, it didn't submit. So go back, see if there's anything that's happening in your browser, but just make sure you're getting a success message. And the other thing is, if you've started the application and you come to a question where you're like, oh, I need to ask someone else, I need to gather some more information, you can go all the way down to the bottom of the application and push save and resume later. It will give you a link you can come back to. It saves it for about 30 days. Do that. Do not exit out and assume it saved any of the information. So first off, we kind of go over through some organizational contact information. Really, where's your Firewood bank going to be, your mailing address, a contact, and also a secondary contact, which is huge when it comes to reporting and really coordinating everything. The other big one to kind of take note of is that when we ask you to describe the planned organizational structure, that if you are a for-profit business, so like a Firewood business or something like that, you do need to have the support from a community partner. And this can be anything from a municipality, a tribal administration, a church, any other kind of nonprofit. And we'll want you to attach those letters of support and describe how that works for you. And then we ask you some questions about, do you have committed volunteers? If yes, how do you plan to recruit others? Really just trying to get a picture of how much work has already been done in creating the Firewood Bank. Another huge one, and that John has also mentioned, is that we do require a written liability waiver for your volunteers. And if you don't have one, that's all right, because you might not, because you're just starting out. We have a sample that you can click there, you download it, and you input your Firewood Bank name. And it's also a requirement that we're in that. So it's pretty easy. It shouldn't be that difficult, and you can attach it right there. We ask you if you have liability insurance, which is possible maybe if you're a private business, but it's not a requirement, mainly just a suggestion if possible. And this is the shortest section, but might actually be the most reflective part. We want you to describe your mission. We want to know what kind of need are you meeting. We want to know about your community really and how you're going to serve them. And the biggest deal is also the outreach plan. Is it going to be word of mouth? Do you use social media? And if you can provide any of those kind of outreach materials, we'd love to see it. And in section 3, now this is the hefty section of the form. So take a deep breath once you get here, because it's going to be a long one. First off, we just want to figure out what kind of equipment you already have. We know that you might not have a lot of this, and that is okay. Don't get stressed about it. Click anything you do. I wanted to mark here that we do require that you have a moisture meter. And if you don't have one, you need to have it in your budget, your proposed budget. We also have a sample moisture content log that we encourage you to use. We think it's great to kind of keep up with, just to make sure that you're sending out the best wood to your recipients. In this next part, we do require a safety plan. And this can be anything from every single person using a chainsaw is over the age of 18, which is a requirement. And also we go through this, they've taken this course, they always have a second person. So any kind of description of what you're planning for in terms of safety and equipment, we'd love to see it there. And the next question is really just going over, have you thought about how you're going to distribute firewood? Is this going to be self-service? So you'll just have it out and someone comes to pick it up 24/7? Is there a certain time that the woodlot will be open, etc.? And let's see, we'll go on. This one, there's nothing huge to flag here. These are just more questions of like, how are you going to do the Firewood Bank schedule? How many months per year? How are you going to choose who can receive firewood? Is it going to be an application, referral? Is your community partner going to be doing a lot of the eligibility processing? So just more questions of how that's going to go. Into section 4. So you've gotten through the big section, and now this is more of just little details. So this is good. The big one, does your Firewood Bank have a bank account or a fiscal sponsor? Yes, no, and then go into the fiscal sponsor communication. And with the UEI, this is the unique entity identifier. This is a requirement for us. It comes even from above us. This can be difficult for some people to be like, wait a second, a UEI, an EIN. The EIN is a tax ID number. It is not that. It is a UEI, a separate number. You can find this at sam.gov. Your fiscal sponsor will most likely have this. If you're a private business, you probably have it. But just make sure you understand the difference between those two, because we have had a few enter in the EIN, which is understandable. They're both 3-letter acronyms for something that's pretty similar. But just make sure you note that. And into the proposed grant budget. That's a huge block of text. You can go read that thoroughly. But the main key points are there is a $10,000 cap for startup. Does that mean every single startup application is going to be 10,000? Definitely not. It's completely reliant on scale. No one item can be over $5,000. Again, this is a requirement that kind of comes even from above us. And if you do not have the necessary safety gear, also the moisture meter, it must be included in your budget. And again, we do have a sample budget that you can download and input in, and it also has some eligible items, which is pretty helpful when you're planning. And for the reporting requirements, this is something, especially when it comes to advancements. So if you're getting the money in advance of ordering, 80% of the funds do need to be spent within 2 weeks of receiving the grant funds. If it's a reimbursement, completely different. We'll have it after the reimbursement time. And then there's also a final reporting. This is usually just accounting for any kind of remaining funds. Anything over $250, we ask for receipts just to make sure we have record of it. And the final report is a little bit more self-reflective. Yes, we do ask for, what happened to the rest of the money? How'd you spend it? Is it all good? But really about how did this impact you? Was this process easy for you? So we really just want to make sure that we can improve on the program going forward as well. A quick section about reasons for denial. We really try to work with anyone. When you make an application, we have our grant managers look at it and they're saying, okay, we love your mission. Something is a little off here. Let's go in. We really try to work with you to make sure that you can qualify. And Section 8 photos. We'd love to see photos, especially because we have a grantee page on firewoodbanks.org. We like to show y'all off the work you're doing, and we also love it, especially for networking. And then you're done. When you get down to the bottom of the page, you click I'm not a robot. Hopefully no one's a robot. And there's that save and resume later if that is what you need to do. But you push submit and you're all good. And really quickly, just an example of someone we've actually already funded for a startup is the Bourbon Firewood Bank out of Missouri. For example, they are the city of Bourbon. They're the ones doing it. And they also have a partnership with Liberator Rocket Heaters. And their funding was up to $9,991. And their major items were chainsaw and also materials to build a shed. And I know someone on here had a question about if a shed can be built on private land. And that's totally possible as long as there's permission granted to the Firewood Bank that there's accessibility in that. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email. Pam is our esteemed grant manager. She's wonderful. The hard questions go to her anyway. So if you have any, that's great. That's all from us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me get us all into view here. So our first question is one that I've heard a couple of times. Our biggest issue is finding volunteers to split seasoned wood. Are we allowed to use funds to provide stipends or incentives to volunteers, like a gas or grocery card, gift bags, etc.? This is for Alliance for Green Heat friends.
It's not prohibited. We really do. Almost all banks have mostly volunteers. So, I think you have to make the case that it's, good use of funds, but it is allowed. Probably not for the entire budget. We like to, of course, see that you make sure you have your safety equipment and other stuff. But if that's something you need to start up or whatever, it is allowed.
Is weather protection required to get a grant? I assume that means sheds or firewood drying weather protection, or maybe it's weather protection for equipment.
So neither is required, although, yeah, actually, the equipment is definitely important. So a lot of people do use money for a shed just for their equipment. And, you know, in out west, in Arizona, New Mexico, actually, you don't hardly even need to cover your wood because it's so high and dry out there. East Coast, getting your wood covered somehow is pretty important, and we really stress that, but it's not required because there's lots of different ways to cover your wood, and some people will deliver wood early in the season, even in the spring, so that homeowners, the people you're delivering it to, can season it for the final 6 to 8 months.
Right. Yeah, somebody's talking about advertising wood banks to communities, and maybe Jessica, you can start off with that, with what you've seen, and anybody else can jump in.
Yeah, so I was working on the chat. So we have a map. I saw the question about, I guess there's a couple here, trying to find if there's already a wood bank near you. Although I'm having a little IT issue, Elisa, in that I don't have everyone as a 2 option. I just have host and panelists. So I sent it to Joel, hoping that he might be able to redirect it. So now that I've got that map link going, hit me with the question again.
Okay, so the question was about advertising to the community about the wood bank. How do you get the word out to folks who might need the wood?
Oh, yes. So one of the best ways to get the word out is to talk to others that are working in that same social service space. So who in your community is managing Leahy applications? What about folks who are taking using the food pantry? That might be another good way. Very few wood banks report difficulty giving away firewood. People come out of the woodwork, to use a good pun. Some of the wood banks have Facebook pages, although that's certainly not the majority. And being co-located somewhere where you can be seen. So many of them are, when they're affiliated with a nonprofit, that's a way that they're able to get the word out to recipients.
Can I just add to that? In doing a little press release or going to your local newspaper or radio is a great way to get volunteers and to get donations of money or donations of wood, and get the word out, because, you know, it's such a great thing to do that I think local outlets are happy to give you a little exposure.
Nice. I had a question about using up the funding, and that there's a 2-week window where you have to use 80% of the funding. Can you talk about that and whether that's a flexible limit?
Darian, why don't you?
Well, I can say that we always try to be super flexible. Like we try to make this as easy as possible, but it's ideal. It's something that we've worked with in the past, but it's definitely something that we try to stick to because it is in the contract as well when you're signing.
The reason is that the Forest Service, technically these grants we're supposed to be reimbursing banks. That's the way the government likes to do it. And we know in a few cases we can. In a few cases, actually, banks do have money, like a church, so they buy everything up front and then we do reimburse them. But as a way of getting around the government's requirement that these are reimbursable, the grants, we just want you to plan first so you can spend most of your money right off the bat. And but if you can't, yeah, we're definitely flexible.
My understanding is there's a lot of interaction between the wood bank that's getting the grant and the Alliance for Green Heat. So you would be having conversations and see that, yeah, you probably do meet the requirements. Yes, this is probably going to be coming towards you. There's a little bit of time in order to do the transfer of funds. You'd end up having a little bit more time than just that, you know, once it hits your account.
Nice. We had a question about what kind of systems you can put in place to make sure that a wood bank isn't being abused, that there aren't people who are taking wood who don't necessarily need it or are selling it. Jessica, you want to speak to that?
Yes, so it is a decision that each wood bank needs to make about how they want to handle that. And it really has varied. And I've seen where there's no vetting process at all, and they've made that choice, and they're and the wood bank volunteers are as emotionally prepared as they can, that, you know, there's some risk to not having a vetting process. Others have their own vetting process, and that you know, the criteria varies widely. And then probably if your group is particularly concerned about that system being abused, then I would recommend going with a social service organization that's able to vet them. There's good reasons to partner with them anyways, because you want to help. But often when there's heating insecurity, there may be other issues that the recipient is having, that connecting with a social service agency might be able to help with a whole suite of issues where you're just focused on emergency heating.
We had a couple of questions about wood quality and also about EPA wood stove standards. So I wonder if maybe John and Darian, you can start on this.
Well, when you're engaged in giving fuel to low-income households, a lot of those households are not going to have a EPA certified stove. And what we are even more worried about is a household that has such an old stove that it's could cause a house fire. But and we'd love to find funding, and it's not possible in the future, where we could help banks to help people replace the stoves, or as this gentleman mentioned, move on to a heat pump. A lot of homes actually would rather not use a stove. When you're on a heat pump, the only thing is you have to be able to pay for the electricity. And so actually a lot of people want a wood stove as a backup to a heat pump, because in the very coldest months of the year, heat pumps do get a little more expensive because they're not as efficient. But yeah, this is really a fuel project, and unfortunately we don't have funds for equipment, but we really urge people, and we'd like to think that maybe a local stove shop would donate a stove or donate at least a sweeping of a chimney. So we'd encourage people to really reach out to your community, to businesses, because there are a lot of businesses that are willing to help efforts like these, which are pretty motivating and inspiring for a lot of people in the community.
Nice. And we had one question about wood stacking for optimal curing. And I don't know if any of you all want to take that on briefly, but I know that that's something that I've been looking into too. So keep a lookout for some good fact sheets in the next year or so.
I hear in Finland there's a debate about whether you should stack with the bark up or bark down, and it's really a heated debate over there. I think it's kind of like sports teams, how you can get families divided in this country. they're really serious about it, but generally you want to get your wood definitely off the ground. That's the most important thing. In the sun is good. Leaving little room for air. It depends. If your wood is already kind of dry, you can you can really get it tight. If it's wet, you want to leave as much spaces in the stack as you can.
I'd point out the EPA has some great resources in their BurnWise program, and so if you Google that will take you to some good resources. There's even a woodshed storage shed design. There are others, of course, but there is a plan on that website.
We had one question about invasive pests and avoiding the spread of those. And whether you've heard of wood banks having to turn away firewood donations because of that.
So we haven't actually heard that. You know, wood is extremely local. Usually donated wood comes within 5 miles. And so that's, you know, if you ran a wood bank right on a state line, it might be a little more complicated because there are areas where you're not supposed to take wood over state lines. But the most important thing is just to do a little research, and we can definitely help with that to find out if there is any pest in your neighborhood. But we have not run across that yet.
Yeah, here in Maine, we have portions of the state in which emerald ash borer has been discovered, and portions in which are yet unaffected. And one of the best things I think you can do is reach out to your state forestry agency. Often they have a forest health division or forest entomologist or pathologist, and they can let you know for where you are what the recommendations are, if there are quarantine zones, best practices, and things like that. It's also generally the state forestry agency has lots of connections within the forestry and logging community. So you should do that anyways, because they might be able to support the wood bank in other ways through social networking, or maybe it leads to donations or volunteers or some other good thing.
On the back to the wood stove topic, we have one attendee who is from California running a major wood stove replacement grant program for senior and low income populations. And I believe this attendee says their one major need is a functional wood bank to supply the wood or fuel for their new EPA certified replacement stove customers. So there we go. We've got a call for a wood bank in that area. There's another question about how many volunteers does it take? What does it take to get enough people together to start a wood bank, keep it going?
I'll jump in on that one. The smallest wood bank, well, there are many unorganized wood banks where it's literally a neighbor helping a neighbor, and that is a wood bank, but maybe not formal. The smallest formal wood bank that I know is the Castine Wood Bank here in Maine. They have 3 regular volunteers. They have a larger group at other times, but there's a core group, and they produce 8 cords of wood a year, which is you know, kind of on the smaller side of many wood banks, but that's what they can handle. And I would encourage new wood banks to start with a small number of cords, understand, work on your processes, work on your volunteer base, make sure that it's not too much too soon. It also lets you you know, as you build up the recipients or work out that sort of thing. There's nothing wrong with starting small, working out your systems, and then growing.
Sorry, I think we have time for one last question. And that is, how long does it take to get approved after submitting your grant? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so you'll for sure hear from someone within 2 weeks. A grant manager will get in contact with you for whatever reason. Then we go through kind of a series of, we do a call sheet, we do a checklist. But after we get through that, which would happen within, you know, as soon as possible, they'd contact you, say, when can you get a call? And that could be within the same day or the next day, whatever. And then we get the contract signed super easily through DocuSign. And then you have your funding within 2 to 3 days, I believe, after contract signing. So it can be pretty quick. So be prepared for that. And we can also stall. Like, it's not that it has to be instant for you as well.
I think 3 weeks is probably our fastest.
Yeah.
But it could be 2 weeks if everything is in the application. Right now, we're actually waiting for another drawdown of money from the Forest Service. So But they usually get it to us in a couple of weeks, and then we'll have a big pot of money to give away.
I just want to make sure your go-to stop is firewoodbanks.org, which takes you to the Alliance for Green Heat, the info about the grant, the resources. There's actually a link to the starting and running community guide to starting and running a wood bank. So if you want to access it that way, if you don't, but you can also do the tinyurl.com/firewoodbank guide to get there as well.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much to Dr. Jessica Leahy and John Ackerly and Darian Dyer for joining us today. And anybody whose questions are in the chat or in the Q&A that we haven't gotten to, we'll be sure to get to you directly. I'd also like to thank Joel from University of Maine Media Services for being our IT support today. Appreciated. And again, to the USDA Forest Service and all of our partners in the National Wood Bank Project. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you three again. This is wonderful.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you again, Joel.
Yeah, happy to help. I'll share the recording as soon as it's done rendering with everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take
Have a
care.
good one.
You too. Bye-bye.